Hello there! This video is part 2 of a two-part series of videos about what would happen if spinning wasn't a good trick. Part 1 is in the top right corner right now, so go and watch that if you haven't, but if you have, we'll just get on with the video. Let's try spinning. That's a good trick, Anakin says. He feels his hands naturally move to turn the stick, but just as he does so, a memory comes into his mind. A memory of when he was back on Tatooine. Two pilots were with Watto. They needed parts for their ship or something. He wasn't really sure. But they were saying that there had been 3 of them, but one of them had died because he'd tried spinning. It probably wasn't a good trick. Back above Naboo, Anakin feels his hands quickly whip back round so the stick is upright in the centered position. Maybe he wouldn't try spinning. Maybe it wasn't such a good trick. Unfortunately, in this small amount of time it took for Anakin to decide to spin and then decide maybe it wasn't a good idea, the Vulture droids that were tailing him have now managed to get a clean shot. He's hit. He needs to land somewhere, but where? He's above a planet, and the only place that he can land that's close by is the Trade Federation's droid control ship. He'd have to make do. R2 has been fried behind him. There's no way of saving the droid, but if he can just land inside the droid control ship, he might be able to survive. Smoke starts to fill the cockpit, and the last thing that Anakin sees after he's landed in the hangar is the emotionless faces of B-1 battle droids surrounding his fighter. So what would happen to Anakin? Well, Anakin would be handed over by the Trade Federation to Sidious. Sidious would have heard of this boy who had managed to compete in pod racing. They were saying he was the chosen one, and Sidious would decide that since the galaxy thought that this boy was dead, he could train him as an apprentice in secret. He could train the chosen one to be a Sith. So, in this reality, Anakin would be trained as a Sith from far younger than in the actual prequel series. And what would the fate of Naboo be? Well, it would be pretty similar to the fate that we see in the actual Phantom Menace. It would go a bit differently. In fact, it would go very similarly to the first part of this two-part video series, because although the Trade Federation would manage to take over the planet, Palpatine wouldn't want to lose his political power by giving the Trade Federation control of Naboo, because after all, he's the senator of Naboo. And so he would tell them to stall and not have the treaty signed. He would mount a counterattack with aid from his allies in the Senate. And so the fate of Naboo would be much the same as it was in the Phantom Menace. It would just take a bit longer for them to secure their freedom. Palpatine would convince the Senate that because of his victory over the Trade Federation, he was a great leader, and a great leader to replace Chancellor Valorum in the Senate. He would therefore become Supreme Chancellor, much like he does in the Phantom Menace. And now back to Anakin. Anakin would wake up in a small room, with a hooded figure in it. The figure, which we know as Darth Sidious, would tell Anakin that he was going to be trained in the ways of the dark side. Anakin would say that he was supposed to be being trained as a Jedi. At this, Sidious would laugh and say that the Jedi had a narrow view of the galaxy, and to achieve true power, you had to embrace the dark side. Anakin would be resistant to this at first, because after all he was kind-hearted and selfless. He wasn't very Sithy at all. I don't know whether Sithy is a word, but it is now. At first, Sidious would struggle to turn Anakin to the dark side, but he would soon realise that Anakin's weakness was not a physical one, it was an emotional one, the emotional connections that he had formed with other people. He would realise that he could taunt Anakin, taunt him that Qui-Gon had been killed on Naboo. This would push Anakin slightly closer to the dark side, but not far enough. Palpatine would then realise that Anakin had one person who he cared about more than anyone else, his mother. Palpatine would abduct Shmi Skywalker from Tatooine and take her in front of Anakin. Palpatine would threaten to hurt or kill Shmi if Anakin wouldn't embrace his anger. Finally, Anakin would crack. He would scream that he hated Palpatine, that Palpatine was evil. Palpatine would just laugh and say that his path towards the dark side was complete. Palpatine would realise that although Anakin had embraced the dark side once, this did not necessarily mean that he would embrace it all the time, like Palpatine wanted him to. and so he would send Shmi back to Tatooine, because Palpatine wouldn't know whether he would need to use Shmi again to persuade Anakin to embrace the dark side. Obi-Wan would feel guilty after what happened on Naboo. He would feel that he had failed Qui-Gon and Anakin. After all, Qui-Gon had died on Naboo, and that was bad enough, but Qui-Gon's final wish was that Obi-Wan trained the boy, and as far as Obi-Wan and the rest of the galaxy knew, the boy had died. The only people that knew that Anakin survived was Sidious, Anakin himself, and Shmi Skywalker. In an attempt to remove his guilty conscience, Obi-Wan would declare that he was going to go to Tatooine. He was going to try and find Shmi Skywalker, and first he was going to tell her what had actually happened to her son, because she deserved to know that much. And second of all, he was going to try and help her escape from Tatooine, because if he couldn't help Anakin, the least he could do was to help Anakin's mother. Unfortunately for Obi-Wan, Palpatine would be aware of all the Jedi affairs that were going on. He would realise that this was a dangerous situation for him. After all, Shmi knew that Anakin was alive, and Palpatine didn't want that information getting out into the wider galaxy. Palpatine would send a bounty hunter, 2 bounty hunters, a whole group of bounty hunters after Obi-Wan to track him, but not to kill him. Instead, these bounty hunters were told to kill Shmi Skywalker, because she was too dangerous to be left alive. Shmi would be killed right in front of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the bounty hunters would escape, and Obi-Wan would be none the wiser as to why this had happened. Palpatine would use this to his advantage, however. Palpatine would tell Anakin that Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Padawan of Qui-Gon Jinn, the only Jedi that Anakin had ever respected. Obi-Wan had killed Shmi Skywalker. Obi-Wan had killed Anakin's mother. This would push Anakin even further to the dark side. But it would also mean that Anakin would hold a deep hatred for Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, while Obi-Wan was still on Tatooine, an assassination attempt would be made on the life of Senator Padme Amidala, formerly the Queen of Naboo. This would mean that a Jedi would be put in charge of her security, but this time it wouldn't be Obi-Wan because he's on Tatooine, and it wouldn't be Anakin because he's not a Jedi. In fact, the galaxy doesn't even think he exists anymore. This time, it would be another Jedi, a Jedi that wasn't quite as in tune with Padme as Anakin was in Episode 2. So this time, when the second assassination attempt was made on her life, when the Kuhun were released into her room, they're the toxic worm things, they would manage to bite her, at least one of them would. The Jedi would sense that there was some distress in the room, and would manage to get Padme to a medical facility in time to save her life. Unfortunately, she would be in critical condition for a long time. Palpatine would convince the Senate that this was an act of war from the Separatist Alliance, and so the Clone Wars would begin. But hang on, the clones have never really been discovered, and this would be raised in the Senate. Not the fact that the clones hadn't been discovered, but instead that there was no Grand Army of the Republic. There was no military that could be used in a war against the Separatists. Palpatine, however, would dismiss this. He would say that he had recently been contacted by a far-off civilization in the outer reaches of the galaxy who called themselves the Kaminoans. They had recently developed a clone army that could be used by the Republic as the Grand Army of the Republic. The Senate would not question this. It was just a stroke of luck, or that's what they believed. Anakin would realise he now had an opportunity. He had harboured hatred for Obi-Wan Kenobi for many, many years. The Jedi were going off on missions, dangerous missions, all throughout the galaxy. All Anakin needed to do was find one where Obi-Wan was exposed. Obi-Wan was putting himself in danger anyway, so if Anakin went and killed him, well, the Jedi wouldn't necessarily link that to the Sith. It was just what had happened. Obi-Wan had just been killed on a mission, and that's all that would be thought of it. So Anakin would wait. He would bide his time and wait for the right mission to ambush and kill Obi-Wan Kenobi. This mission would eventually present itself. I don't know whether you remember, but in the Clone Wars, the final episode of Season 4, Maul sets a trap on Raydonia for Kenobi. He draws him out by basically killing villagers. Maul would draw Kenobi out, and Anakin wouldn't be aware that it was Maul drawing Kenobi there, but Kenobi was on his own. He was going to a dangerous world, on a dangerous mission, and this was Anakin's opportunity. Obi-Wan would arrive on Raydonia, and it would go as it does initially in the Clone Wars episode. Maul would confront Obi-Wan and brag about how he killed Obi-Wan's master. At this, Anakin would be enraged, although in a way he would also be excited. He had happened upon the two people that in his head he could attribute all the pain in his life to. Maul. Maul was the cause of the death of the only father figure he had ever known, and Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan, he believed, had killed his mother. He would come out from where he was hiding and confront both Maul and Obi-Wan. A battle would then ensue. Maul versus Obi-Wan versus Anakin. A free-for-all. Maul would die, and then it would be a 1 versus 1. A 1 versus 1 between Obi-Wan and Anakin. And it would be much like the scenes on Mustafar during the Battle of the Heroes in Episode 3. Obi-Wan would try and talk sense into this boy, a boy that he hadn't seen in many, many years. This boy would accuse Obi-Wan of killing his mother, and Obi-Wan would know it wasn't true. Obi-Wan would try and say that he had been tricked. Obi-Wan would say that he was trying to help Shmi. Anakin, however, wouldn't listen. It would end up in a stalemate, and Obi-Wan would manage to escape. After hearing Obi-Wan's side of the story, Vader would confront Sidious, and would ask him what had actually happened. Sidious would say that it didn't really matter, because Vader had found his true destiny. Vader would want to hurt Sidious. He would know that Sidious was lying, but part of him believed that Sidious was the only family that Vader now had. Palpatine would punish Anakin for his weakness, and say that Vader's impulsive behaviour may have exposed the Sith to the Republic, and more importantly the Jedi, far too early in their plans. The Jedi were now aware that Anakin had survived. They would be able to realise that the last signal of Anakin's N1 starfighter on Naboo, when they checked the records, was as it crashed into the Trade Federation control ship. They would realise that they could therefore ask the Trade Federation what had happened to Anakin, and they therefore would also know that the Trade Federation would be linked to the Sith. The Jedi would begin an investigation, and Sidious would have to act fast. He would have to remove the Trade Federation from the galaxy before they talked about what had happened to Anakin during the Battle of Naboo. Sidious would track down Newt Gunray and the other leaders of the Trade Federation who actually knew what happened on a Trade Federation ship. The Jedi, however, would also track down the Trade Federation on this ship. Sidious and Vader would go to this ship personally because this was of the utmost importance. The Jedi would arrive just as the Sith had massacred all the people in the Trade Federation ship. The Jedi would be next. They would be no match for the Sith because they weren't masters, they were just Jedi Knights, they were just investigating. They would never imagine that they would come up against the two most powerful dark side users in the galaxy. However, before they were killed by the Sith, they would be able to send off a distress call. Palpatine would realise what had happened and would, in his panic, execute Order 66, in an attempt to cause some confusion, to stall the Jedi. However, many of the Jedi Masters would have left the temple. They would have heard the distress call and go to its source on the Trade Federation control ship. The temple would therefore be completely vulnerable to Order 66, and most of the Jedi in the temple, in fact all of them, would have been wiped out by the clones. There would then be a confrontation between the Jedi Masters and the Sith on the Trade Federation ship. The Sith would gain an upper hand, and in a last-ditch attempt for the Jedi to destroy the Sith, they would destroy the Trade Federation ship. They would explode it, therefore destroying what was left of the Jedi Order and the Sith. So the Sith are gone, and there's not many Jedi left, and the ones that are left aren't very powerful or wise. There would be a massive power void in the galaxy because the Separatist Alliance had been a puppet of Palpatine and Palpatine was gone. The Republic would no longer have its Supreme Chancellor, and the galaxy would very soon become ruled by warlords and gangs. Some of the warlords and gangs would rule planets or planet systems, and others would control governments behind the scenes. The galaxy would lose any central government that it once had in the form of the Republic, and each planet would have its own government. The remaining Jedi would either try and act as freedom fighters, or lose their way and join these gangs, or start their own gangs and take control of planets. And that's about it. That's how I see Star Wars going, if spinning wasn't a good trick, but Anakin knew this, and so decided not to spin in The Phantom Menace. The galaxy would be thrown into a state of chaos, as any power that had once existed would be quickly removed. But let me know in the comments, what do you think would have happened? Do you think I'm right at all, or do you think it would have gone a completely different way? Or let me know anything else in the comments that you want to tell me. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and watch any of the other videos I've made. There's a great one in the bottom left, and Might be one in the top left as well. It depends what I decide to do. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching. Bye!